Being Black in America comes with its challenges. However, we understand that enlightenment through education is the oppressor's worst fear. By bridging the gap between academia and the people, our purpose is to equip you with knowledge that breaks down barriers during your journey towards truth and freedom. Welcome to the Black and Highly Dangerous Podcast.
Yo, Dev, welcome back to our October book review episode for the month.
Yes. I feel like it's very timely considering that we are right in the middle of political season. And honestly, I feel like since the 2016 election, political season has never ended. Like we've just been in this endless cycle of politics, particularly around identity. So I feel like probably it started with Obama, really. So we go back to 2008, but I feel like, this is the perfect book for an October discussion, given where we are.
I think Obama, I think, kind of started this new era of politics a little bit. But even with Obama, I think for him, for me at least, it was more so when he was running, it'd be a little bit more anxiety and like tension. And then after he won, it's okay, we good, we chilling a little bit. And I wasn't like still like politics, what's going on and all this craziness going on. You know, we knew the Republicans were like trying to stop him from doing things, but that was kind of like, as bad as it got. And then, the Trump era, put those kind of politic conversations on steroids. And it just, like you said, I like how you said that, like, it just it never ends since 2016. It just, every day, politics, and getting crazier and crazier for sure. But I agree. I think this is definitely a good time to talk about this with elections and important elections coming up very soon. And so, it's a good opportunity to kind of take a step back and think about how we process politics, like Dad said, identity politics. Is that the way we approach things? Is that the best way to approach them? Should we begin to interrogate how we approach and discuss identity politics? Does it get us to where we need to be? Is this the right strategy politically? Even how we look at our politicians and how we approach politics, is this like, is there more nuance to it? I think this book definitely helps us dive deeper into that kind of conversation.
Exactly. The question is, do we even understand identity politics? And, the book for today is called Elite Capture. And it is a book that explores how elites have captured identity politics. And it is published by Dr. Olufemi Taiwo, who is an associate professor of philosophy at Georgetown University. Before reading this book, and I'm pretty sure we'll get into this, before reading this book, I had a completely different notion of identity politics. And it's like, wow, very much an eye-opener.
No, for sure. This was something that wasn't on my radar, but luckily Daph, was in the know and have seen some, I guess, academic conversations about this. So I'm glad you suggested this book because it's good for me that, everyone's and I like this kind of, BHD book review type strategy thing that we're doing now, because we have opportunity to kind of step out our comfort zones a little bit, because the discipline of philosophy is something that, I am not used to. And then so going in and reading this work, I was telling Dad before we hit record that, it was one of the first times in a long time, I would say, that I stepped away from the book and was like, okay, what just happened here? I grasped some things, but I had to actually go and do some more reading, some more research to really get a stronger grasp of the concepts in the book. And it wasn't like it was a very well-written book. And he did an eloquent job, but I think it was the approach to the concepts and the theories and philosophy is just not the way my mind is used to processing things. And so I kind of like that exercise. Like, oh, wow, I felt like a a student again, right? Of like having to do the additional insights and trying to figure out and preparation to come talk to you all about this. That also motivated me too, and to make sure I have like some accurate assessment of kind of what he's talking about, even though it's not normal to me.
Same. This is a quick read on Audible. It's only like 3 hours. But as Terrell said, there are some really complex and interesting ideas in the book. And I think this is a book that would actually, you might benefit from having like a physical copy or like an electronic copy and not just listening. Because I know I came across like quotes. I'm like, oh, I wish I could like visually see this quote and write it down. But, speaking of like philosophy, Terrell mentioned that he's not a philosopher, and actually very few of us are. It was really interesting. Because he's an associate professor, so I assume with tenure, and he's like one of a kind almost. I looked up some statistics related to Black people with philosophy PhDs and Black philosophers in the professorate, and wow, over the past 20 years, like they do like an annual survey of like earned degrees or something like that. And the percentage of Black people who earned a PhD, what do you think is the highest percentage in any given year?
Of Black people that earn a PhD, like out of all PhDs?
In philosophy.
Oh, in philosophy? I'm going to say, and I think this might be a stretch, I'm going to say 2%.
Okay. You were a little lower. So a lot of years it was only 1%, but there were like a couple years where it's like up to like 4%. So it ranged from like 1% to 4%. So if you averaged it all out, it's probably about 2%, what you said. And they don't have really good data on the percentage of Black philosophy faculty members who are Black. But given the number of, philosophers who graduate annually with the PhD, 4% is probably max, but it's likely closer to like 1%.
Yeah, I'm about to say a quarter of that.
Because not everyone gets jobs. So, I just, it's amazing to engage with, the ideas of a Black philosopher who, I feel like engaged, with a lot of international perspectives, engaged with, current political issues that are happening in the US as well. And so, yeah, it was a very interesting read.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Okay. Yeah. So shout out to Dr. Taiwo, for being one of a kind and doing this kind of work and giving us the opportunity to discuss it. Like I said, I like this. This is, definitely always one of the missions of BHD is to uplift, Black scholars, Black activists, just folks doing good work, and just use this platform to help amplify their work and their voices. And so shout out to him for doing the work and, makes our job a little easier. Just talk about it. And one of a kind. Go ahead.
I was going to say, of course, we'll have this in the resources, but once again, the book is called Elite Capture: How the Powerful Took Over Identity Politics and Everything Else.
All right. So where you want to start, Dav?
I think for our audience, it might be a good idea to just start with, the major part of the title, Elite Capture. Is also something that I just wasn't familiar with. And so it's like, maybe we can discuss this concept a little bit before we dig into a nuanced identity politics.
Yeah. And I think Elite Capture is something that I think we all kind of have a sense of or had a sense of, and maybe just didn't have the appropriate way to articulate it or the terminology. So I think this captures that. And essentially, I think Elite Capture, what I derive from the book, is the ability of, elites. And I think elites can take various forms, right? I mean, it could be, yes, the extreme wealthy, it could be folks in a certain group who have power, et cetera. And essentially how they kind of manipulate or can control the narrative movements or certain environments that really helps them stay advantaged, and it doesn't really allow they're really not concerned with the greater good. I'd say that way. Most of the things they do, and they can look in different ways and different strategy, but it's always in the essence to kind of maintain their position. And those are the things that they always kind of seek and speak to them, regardless of what's going on. And so various movements, various types of whatever situation, the capture part of it is like they kind of take that over and still essentially play by their rules in a lot of different ways. Is one of the big things that I'm going to talk about a little bit that stood out to me in this book too.
I agree with that. I kind of, saw it as the opposition putting on the same team uniform that you have on, but low key working against the interests of the team they're pretending to be on.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where like we might have values, we might have movements, might have messages that are really dear to the people who are on the ground, who, these messages or movements are important to the masses, but those at the top take over, co-opt those like really important symbols and messages and use them to essentially maintain the status quo. And to maintain their benefits, as Terrell said.
Yeah. I think one of the examples that he gave, and this was in the Boston Review piece he wrote, when he talked about Andrew Yang, that really helped me clearly understand, I guess, the idea of elite capture and a lot of what you just mentioned, Dav. And so the example he talked about is when Andrew Yang, in his quote, he told Asian Americans that they needed to step up their support relief efforts when it came back to COVID-19 and the racial hostility that accompanied that, which was mainly directed towards Asian Americans. And so that idea of like having those who are being victimized kind of fight this battle and not call on to, folks who have power, like white folks, to actually step up and do something about it, or the groups who are doing the oppression, mainly because that group is what was needed to keep him in power or, kind of keep his political influence. So he didn't want to kind of, piss them off essentially. So he rather used, the approach of getting the Asian American community to kind of fight the battle. So in one essence, it sounded like he was doing something good and noble. But on the other side, when you look at it from a different angle, it's like, were you really trying to, help out your community, or were you really just trying to save face and play the middle ground using these kind of rhetoric?
I think that example, like, I don't know what else you have to say about elite capture, that specific concept just by itself, but I think it kind of like segues a little bit into like the identity politics realm.
For sure. And this is something I didn't know. And I guess the term identity politics was first, and they mentioned this, I saw, in the book and then in the interviews and in the Boston Review, the Combahee River Collective, which was like an organization of Black feminist activists in the 1970s. And they kind of popularized that term identity politics. And I like how he explained how it originally was supposed to be used. And I think it's, been morphed and somewhat perverted over time.
It's something very negative.
Yeah. And I think we know like somewhat of the general history of Black feminism, right? Of just trying to kind of coalesce and form their own coalition, if you will, so that they can, speak to the needs of Black women specifically, because their needs weren't being met in the overall general conversations of feminism more broadly. And I think, the founders were very careful in the saying that, it's not about kind of being exclusive. It's not about, not building bridges, if you will. It's about looking for common problems. And yes, there can be different coalitions, but all the coalitions should be working together to fix these common problems. And so it's like they were very careful in saying that it wasn't supposed to be this kind of inclusive or gatekeeping type of environment. It was supposed to just be, hey, we do need a space so that way we can strategize and understand what are the direct needs or the prioritized needs we need for our specific community and our specific experiences. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't kind of reach across the aisle and work together with other folks who might be fighting a similar battle, but even though it may not look exactly like ours.
Identity politics kind of reminds me of like the recent kind of perversion of like the term woke. So woke used to be like something I feel like, our community created in relation to, a critical consciousness that you have about like the broader environment. And like now woke has been turned into, it's turned into legislation that is used to like silence people. Yeah. And the same thing I feel like has happened with identity politics. It has become like a shorthand for people suggesting that one group of people just focused on trying to secure benefits for their own group, or one group of people who's just like obsessed with identity in politics, when really, like you said, it is about using identity to build bridges. It is acknowledging, it's intersectionality. It is acknowledging the individual, issues and struggles and strengths of different groups, and finding bridges or commonality in order to work together for a broader mission. So you think about, I don't know if he said this in particular, but I feel like for instance, the Bernie Sanders campaign, to me, it came off as like anti-identity politics. Like we need to move beyond these like identity politics things, when actuality, he was trying to build an umbrella coalition of people. Like that's identity politics.
Yeah.
That is identity politics. And like I said, I don't know if he said it, but I feel like that was kind of the rhetoric. Like, let's move beyond, like, especially these racial identity politics.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was one of the issues that we discussed here on this platform about Bernie, was that, we felt that he wasn't acknowledging people's identities or the uniqueness of experiences with those identities. And so I feel like, most folks can get behind Bernie's mission, but it was still like, there still has to be an acknowledgement, I think, right, of like, you don't have to just focus solely on only Black issues, but realize that there are unique experiences within the Black community that, should be addressed, or at least should be a part of the strategy of trying to fix the problems. And that makes us feel better. Like, okay, you recognize that there's unique things going on here. So that way, when you do create a solution, you're not kind of neglecting our community because you acknowledge that. And I think that was a part of the issue with Bernie's, that he wasn't doing enough acknowledging of the unique experiences. And then it was more difficult for him to gain that support.
I would say, I think that was just the biggest thing. What I thought identity politics, and it just goes to show I need to read more, because it's like, this feminist knowledge has been here. It's kind of like shame, Daphne, you should have known better. But I'm gonna admit, identity politics is what the popular rhetoric around it. But I feel like, after reading this, we should probably try to reclaim that term.
Yeah, we should. It should be. And I was thinking of too, when I was like looking more into this, and I was thinking about an example we shared on the last episode you shared of the I think it was USC, the majorettes, or
yes, I thought about that too.
And you had asked me, like, because there's a lot of HBCU folks that, as we talked about last episode, Black women at USC created this majorette group, dance kind of troupe that is very commonly seen and originated with HBCUs. And so of course USC is not an HBCU, So a lot of HBCU folks have been having major issues with this happening. And right there, that just really kind of captures this idea of identity politics as how it's kind of being currently used, being like gatekeepers, exclusive. And I think, when we talk about the originators of this concept or whoever popularized it, right, Black women and Black feminists, this is not the approach. I think the approach they would go and say is like, hey, this is great. We have the same vision. We have the same goals. I'm glad that now our vision and goals that we've had here at these HBCUs are now reaching and influencing Black people in these white spaces, right? You're building the bridge. We're all working towards the same thing, whether it's just dancing, whether it's supporting and praising the culture and loving the culture, right? Those are things you should be holding hands and applauding each other for, and not kind of attacking each other because they're not at an HBCU. So I think, that's just another example of kind of what we've been discussing here.
Mm-hmm. I also think so, like, yes to that. I was also thinking about how, like, while it's in the hands of these Black women, and it's like, hopefully it stays there, because does it become an elite capture thing if they all graduate and then that team full of white people and like all of a sudden, so for instance, thinking about examples of like elite capture of identity politics, the first thing that came to mind was Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats kneeling for 8 minutes, 41 seconds, or, the amount of time. I think it was 8 minutes, 41 seconds. It was 8 minutes and something for the amount of time that the police officer kneeled on George Floyd, and Nancy Pelosi got her kente stole on. And it's kind of like if this team 10 years from now becomes like all white and they're like bucking, it's gonna be like, oh.
Yes. And that was one of the the strategies of elite capture was in essence like the elite understanding that maybe there's an uprising or there's an issue, and so they will kind of pacify the needs. It's kind of language you use, like pacify the needs or the desires of the group demanding things, but not give any kind of actually like material success or anything like kind of immaterial, right? Materializing those goals and actually making it into something real. And I think that's a perfect example of that, right? Like, we're going to do this kind of symbolic thing and things we've talked about time and time again, Daph, with the Democratic Party, right? We're doing this symbolic thing, and, it's going to just pacify them, say that we're on their side, but we ain't going to really give them what they would want if they were in power, right? Or if we had all the power, right? I think a lot of the things Black folks would want, it would just look a lot different than how we've been getting it piecemeal.
It's giving us Juneteenth when we want reparations.
Yes, exactly.
It's, and we'll get to this later in terms of what Professor Taiwo offers as an alternative, but it's important, I think, and I think we're all just collectively starting to think about this, like the importance of the outcome over like process or over like these symbols.
Yeah, I think that's important. One thing that stood out to me as well was this concept of like, I think he called like gamification. Correct. Which I was calling game theory. Now I read up on like, that's not game theory. It's like a different kind of thing. And I think the person, I can't remember the name of the individual. Oh yeah. C. Tai Nguyen. His name of his book is called Games, Agency as Art. And I think his book talked about things like value capture, not really like elite capture. But just the idea of how Taiwo kind of broke it down in his book of like how the elites, especially with elite capture, kind of participate in this gamification is where like, you think about a video game or a board game, right? There are going to be certain rules, that we play, like you think about Monopoly or whatever, right? Certain things you got to do to kind of win the game and things that we're incentivized to do. And so the difference between like us regular folk and the elites is that, us regular folks commonly play in the game And so we don't get to really create the rules, right? The elites, the decisions they make, the things they do, they create the rules of how we play. And then now we have to operate within that system. So I think that was very, that kind of like visualization really helped me grasp like, oh, wow. Because we see this in so many different ways, right? I'm thinking of just like even with work, right? So many people now, especially like millennials and younger, like we like that work-life balance, right? We want to work from home, right? We want that hybrid approach. But then you have these folks in these companies like, no, y'all got to be in the office, right? And so like we can't control, because they control the money, they control who they hire, who we hire, how that work culture is supposed to be. So we can't control that, but we have to play that game, but still going to the office every day if that's what the institution says. Although overwhelming majority of us would love to, be able to work from home, be with our families, take walks, etc. And so I'm like, oh, that's really powerful to think about in that way, and like how this just looks in all different kind of spheres, whether it's politics, whether it's education, economy, all those kind of things. It's like really thinking about how we are going to address these things, how we can combat it if we're playing by the rules or doing it in a way or within the rules that they created that benefits them the most.
Yes. I actually made a note about the gamification as well. And the example you talked about, like wanting to be at home with family, but we're really buying into like these systems that incentivize us overloading ourselves, overworking ourselves, burning ourselves out for the profits of like a very small group of people. And I feel like this year I have been trying to pull back from that gamification system. Although I feel like the academia and tenure track, that is a bit like publish or perish. Like how much can you do? Like it is it is gamified. It really is. Other examples that they talked about was like Uber with the ratings, or like if from the driver perspective, there are little, I guess, things on their end, like, did you smile? Did you do this? Did you do that? And it's just interesting how gamification can like take away some of our, I don't want to say our critical thinking, but like things just become automated. We are reacting to these gamified systems rather than just acting on our own. It makes me think about that episode we had about like coded bias, and how like there are these like systems in place that just kind of make decisions for us, or they shape how we react to things. And that's what gamification made me think of a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and I think thinking about like, I think one of the is like maybe a quick phrase or something he said, like along the lines of, it's elite capture when they're like, they will never really do what the majority of folks want to do. And they, like I said, they may pacify in some ways. And that just and I thought about academia as well. Like, oh, this is definitely a game. And I think overwhelming majority of folks who go through it are feeling the same way, like, yo, this is too much. Like, got this PhD. I just want to teach. I want to just do my job. I don't want to have to do this rat race of proving myself, of either bringing in millions of dollars of grants, which again, of course, of course I would do that. Because why? Because, those indirect costs to the university, 30-40%, they get a good piece of that. So this is why they set the system up this way. And this is a barometer of our success, is because we're playing in this system. And so now I'm starting to think of things like, okay, I think the way that's going to have me reframe, like if I'm asking for things or we're pushing for things, is like, what would it look like if the RTP committee of university was all Black, right? Black men and Black women. And what rules would we change, or how would we change the tenure process, right? And I think it would just look a lot differently. And I think a lot would happen. And I just feel like that's kind of the approach that I think I'm going to start taking, is like not trying to play within the system. Like, okay, we were in control and we got to do exactly what we want. What would it be? And then that's what we should push for, and not stop pushing for it until it happens, and not like accept anything less because it's just doesn't benefit what the mission is, or we're trying to accomplish.
Agreed. I thought like if I hadn't gotten an academic job, I was going to figure out how to do the things I love without like the burdens um of like the tenure and promotion stuff.
Hmm.
Ugh,
If you had
lucky
the
for you,
opportunity,
you're on
Daph,
the
how
other
would you,
side.
how would you, what things would, how would you change the tenure process?
For me, I do think like the production of knowledge is important, but I feel like we now emphasize quantity over quality.
Hmm.
And so, one, thinking about like the tenure standards that they had 30 years from now, those,
Hmm. Hmm.
like, an, enough knowledge that you're like actually contributing. I think there probably should be more emphasis on building um, good learning environments for students. So yeah, I would put a little bit more emphasis on the teaching, but also like the public knowledge and the service. I I don't, it's interesting because what people think professors are evaluated on, like the teaching, sometimes isn't what matters very much at all in terms of tenure and promotion. And so for me, it would be kind of balancing the vision of like what a professor does and is expected to do. Did they do that? Okay, you get tenure.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I definitely agree. I'm not like about, this output system, right? Like being a machine. And one, I also thought about like just the idea, like a lot of these big schools love folks who can bring in grant money. And I know we had conversations before just about like with venture capitalism and like how many Black people, and particularly Black women, how little or very few of them, very tiny percentages even get access to that capital. And I'm thinking like, yo, it's probably the same thing with grants and stuff. Like, yes, we know, Black academics have gotten grants and things of that nature, but I'm just wondering like the percentages of even that, like really the big grants and things that really propel you to that kind of national status, right? I'm sure that's going to be overwhelmingly white in so many different ways. And so I think, yeah, just thinking about the tenure process, thinking about just marginalized communities and just access and how things are just not going to be fair because of the system and who's going to benefit the most because of networks and connections and generational connections. That plays a big part. So for me, I think I would change the tenure process more so of just like professional development, right? Like I'm not going to expect you to have 10 publications. So yeah, if you get one or two, that's professional development. You're learning the process of publishing. I want to see you, try to build some networks, right? Join some groups. I want to see you be involved in your community. Like I just want a general sense of growth and you just demonstrating that you're just going to be a good and active scholar. And that can look different from everybody and not just like by publications and output. And I think if you have it more so that way, like we're using the tenure process just for you to demonstrate that, we all want somebody that's not going to just sit around not do nothing, but like you teach and you enjoy teaching, right? And if you excel at that, then that should be, a kind of a higher percentage, right, of your tenure. It doesn't have to be like equal for everyone. You know what I mean? Because some people are going to be loving to publish and want to publish 10, 20 articles, and that's fine. But I don't think that should be weighed more than somebody that enjoys teaching, right, and is excelling and is exceptional educator or engaged with the community or comes up with great ideas and the service member, whatever. I think that's the issue right now. We just weigh things so differently, and I just feel like it should be maybe a conversation that's had in the front end. Like, okay, what kind of scholar do you want to be? How would you weigh yourself and your contributions as far as how you would value it? And then now we can, judge you or assess you on your own kind of system. And it should be more individualized and like this, kind of broad one size fits all approach that we've been seeing.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I like that. I do know, so my friend who was on the job market last year, there was a department that was kind of like that. Like if you were not publishing as much or getting as many grants, you were teaching a little bit more. And it was kind of like the points added up either way. So it's like whatever you're doing, you're going to get the points as long as you're pulling your weight for the department. And I was like, I could do that. But it's one important point too mentioned is you talked about like grant dollars and like how difficult they are to get. Well, the Ford Foundation, I don't know if you heard, is actually winding down. So like this was like a funding opportunity that was really important to scholars of color, and now they're getting rid of it.
Oh
Because
wow.
the elites don't even find it as important anymore,
Mm-hmm.
Lord.
Mm-hmm. Not surprised. Not surprised. And it's just like it just shouldn't have to be this way, right? I mean, technically we shouldn't have to have our own separate, in a perfect world, like separate funding opportunities. But and then when they disappear, then here we go, right? With almost nothing, and now competing to almost get nothing. It's just, and it's also, we know too, a lot of our ideas are not valued in because of who's in charge, right? Especially when we talk about things like race and marginalized communities in general. Oh, that's not really, real research, right? You kind of get that a lot. And so the funding is going to go where folks feel is of value. And if they don't feel like it's a value to them, they're not going to fund it. So a lot to be said about that. I know we went on a rant, off topic a little bit, but it is, relatable to these academic spaces of what, and I wonder if that's a part of the reason why he probably wrote this book a little bit, being academia and seeing this system and feeling that pressure that we all feel. And of course, generalizing it to a lot more things, but I'm pretty sure that played that he has a personal connection to that. It has to be.
Well, it makes me think of like another concept that was brought up in the book, deference politics. And so it is people like me, like you, Terrell, like Dr. Taiwo, who, we might not necessarily be the elites, but we might be the people who like get past the mic and we're expected to like be representatives in this discourse. And sometimes our perspectives might represent the masses, but sometimes they are not. They don't represent the masses. So, I think that was kind of like in terms of like tying it into like the autobiographical piece or the personal piece, that deference politics and how many of us in our positions are, handed the mic as a mechanism to push the further elite capture of identity politics.
No, agreed, right? I think, because those of us who might be, of course, earn our position or thrusted in some positions, I think, and I think it's different than like, because I know we hear the term, some people might think it's like, oh, like tokenism, etc. And I'm sure that these elites will use it in that capacity, but I don't think it's like always the case. I think it's just folks getting in certain positions, getting access to certain tables and being in some conversations. And then either those folks in the room might yield and expect that person to speak for an entire community, or even folks within that community. Okay, they're there. Even like what we think somebody like Obama, right? Like, oh yeah, all right, we got him in there. He gonna do what we all need him to do or expect him to do if we were all there. And that doesn't happen, right? And so it does become challenging. That should be something that should be discussed a little bit more, of like that role. And I think this is why, folks always say there's strength in numbers, right? Because many folks are comfortable with just one person. Even when I talk to, either students or folks in the community, they always still have this idea of like, oh, we need a leader. We need one person to lead us. Like we talk about, like they always mention like Martin Luther Kings and folks like that. And I think that just plays a role into it. Just like the expectations of how we should move forward, how we should progress, is always feeling comfortable with having somebody in those positions. But I think we need to start kind of challenging that a little bit more.
Yes, agreed. So anything else stuck out to you before we get to the alternative that Taiwo offers us to the elite capture of identity politics?
No, I think, we covered a lot of what, the bigger things that stuck out to me from the book so far. So we can talk about some of the ideas of what he thought about trying to get us to, move past this.
Yeah. So, agreed that concept that was offered was constructive politics, which is, like we mentioned earlier, a shift from a focus on process to a focus on results. And that means redistributing resources and distributing power to the people who are most affected by the status quo, and actually giving us some results, and not just kente stoles and kneeling. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, that's going to have to be a part of it. And it's just like, but the question is like, how will that happen? Right. I mean, to give power to somebody, I mean, somebody either has to be willing to give that kind of power, or is it about taking power in some ways and, kind of revolution? I think the how to get to that point, I think it is a great idea. The how to get to that point, I wasn't super clear on. And I don't know if you had any more clarity than I did on that, Dav.
I think that was kind of, and I might have saw this in like one of the, reviews, that is like, this is a philosophical book, so it might not like speak to all of like the practical implications. It's not a how-to guide on how to do these things, but it sparks discussion.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think it's the right kind of discussion, right? Because I think a lot of what he presented, understanding how elite capture works, processes involved, understanding how gamification works, and recognizing that, kind of waking up, like we're playing in the system, almost like you think of like the movie The Matrix, right? Again, the idea of being woke and like realizing, oh wait, this is all like played out. We have to do this. So recognizing, trying to break out the system, and then trying to regain or obtain a substantial amount of power to change your community. And of course, there's no way we're going to expect him to, like you said, give us all the answers. But I think that's a part of the next steps, right? Folks like us having conversations, others taking the torch. And I'm sure, he's still young as well. And so I'm sure he's going to write a lot more about this and probably fill in some of those blanks of how we can get to that point in a more realistic fashion.
This actually made me really interested in going back to read his first book, Reconsidering Reparations. I want to see what that's about, what he talk about there. So yeah,
for sure. And I think, one of the things that stood out to me in thinking about this, because in one of his interviews, he mentioned it. And I guess can be one of the consequences of identity politics, right? Like, even when we think about it here and we essentially think about like the African-American experience, right? And then you talk about conversations about ADOS, et cetera. The other folks like, no, we have to like think about the global diaspora. And then, one thing he talked about when he was talking about capitalism in his interview, he was like, capitalism doesn't operate with boundaries, right? And we see how it's been the exploitation of it globally since colonization, and Spain and Portugal, all these other countries, right? And they just literally went to other bounds to gain capital and exploit folks, and slavery, et cetera. And then he talked about how a lot of the revolutions, like the Haiti Revolution, French Revolution, I think there was like a revolution at the same time in South America. He was like, this wasn't by coincidence. He was like, there was like this idea of, identity politics and that coalition building, and then realizing, whoa, we're not the only ones going through this. This elite superpower, these countries are all oppressing us. And so now if we all fight at the same time, it's going to get some change, and some change is going to happen, in which it did. And so I think that's another way to start thinking about how we can get to that, that idea of constructive politics, is also just really being more proactive in expanding that bridge, right, across the globe. And then it'll look differently when we all come together. And now, yes, we have issues in the US, but we're fighting at the same time. Those folks in England are fighting, those folks in South America are fighting, right? We're doing this more united front globally. And then I think we're going to see some real change as well.
I agree. And I think that was the beautiful thing about this book, the international perspective. I feel like we've talked about this a lot, Terrell, how it's like expanding our knowledge of what's going on globally, figuring out how we can build these bridges to ultimately upset the status quo.
Yeah. And maybe, okay, that's something we can think about, right? Future book topics is let's find a book that talks about, the Black experience in some of these other countries or some overlap. There's got to be something out there for sure. And then we can dive a little deeper into that to have conversations and us dissecting, the similarities and differences from what we see here and what we might be seeing in another country or two.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that covers majority of the talking points I have. I don't know if you have anything left on yours, Dav.
No, just, I think you all should check out the book. Like I said, it's a short read on Audible, but if you want the quotes, if you want to be able to highlight things, pull it out, maybe you can order it probably, I think, from Haymarket Books. We're going to be down, no to capitalist system. So we're not going to say Amazon. But, get it from your local Black bookstore.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or request it there too. They may not have it. And, you put a request and they'll get it for you and help out folks. Yeah. And then check out, his interviews, check out some of his other writings. I think he is going to be definitely, a leader in, the philosophical field for our community and breaking things down from a lens that's similar to ours. So I think this is going to be very important. And also just think about how this can influence us. Like I said, we're about to head into a major political elections coming up for many folks. Then, of course, we know another presidential election a couple years from now, which is already gearing up. So I think it's also important for us to have these conversations just to think about how we want to embark on these political journeys and how we process things. And it should be a lot more coalition building for sure. And it should be also us really thinking about what we want to see and not just accepting the pacifying nature of the elites on both sides, right? Some just shut us up and don't hear us out. And then others that we tend to side with more don't also give us what we want. They just do enough to keep us quiet. And that's what both sides are trying to do, is just keep us quiet, just in different ways. And I think we have to begin to really, really interrogate that some more and push back on that a lot more.
Agreed.
Well, as always, like Dav said, check out the book, whichever way is feasible for you. But we do recommend, BHD recommendation is definitely get the written copy, so you can, like I said, highlight and stuff like that. Other than that, if you haven't followed us on social media yet, you can follow us on social media at BHD Podcast. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to keep all our latest episodes and content there. If you want to reach out to us, questions, comments, concerns, reach out to us at bhdpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you all and respond to you all. And after you do that, can you please leave a review and rating on iTunes? That really helps us out, with the algorithm, so that more people can just find us organically through that system. So go ahead, drop a review and rating there. And after you do all of that, share us with your friends, share us with your family, and share us with your enemies. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.
If you're interested in continuing this and other conversations, visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to subscribe to our email list, suggest topics, and participate in our discussion forums.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at BHD Podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite platform. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.